Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of the Intelligence Podcast, where we interview GroupM's experts and break down the key insights from our publications and thought leadership pieces. I'm your host, Jared Bayman. GroupM recently released its 2019 end-of-year U.S. advertising forecast that outlines our predictions on U.S. advertising growth going into 2020. Back for more to take us through the key insights and takeaways from the forecast is the report's author and GroupM's Global President of Business Intelligence, Brian Weiser. Welcome back, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
Let's jump right into this. One of the things in the report that I don't think anyone will find particularly surprising in today's day and age is how digital-first companies are driving most of the predicted advertising growth, representing a 50% share of advertising. You mentioned that even as the current digital-first behemoths, think Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Alphabet, eBay, IAC, Uber, and Booking.com, they see their growth rates normalize. The U.S. remains more likely to produce more of these kinds of marketers in the years ahead than most other economies. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the role SVOD companies might play in this?
Yeah, well, I think we've seen so many companies that can operate at a meaningful scale establish themselves in the United States and maybe to the exclusion of other countries in many instances. And you have dozens of companies now beyond that, the first group of 8 you mentioned, who are spending hundreds of millions of dollars each. Wayfair, Chewy, many of them have direct consumer-like attributes, and many of them are really just retailers that are centered around e-commerce. But definitely business models which are centered around direct-to-consumer related models are a key source of growth going forward. And the SVOD streaming services are just the latest example.
Yeah, I mean, SVOD, it's really come hard and heavy. And in the spirit of that first question, though, these digital-first companies seem to be largely technology companies or companies selling themselves as tech-first companies. And so far, many of the highly anticipated tech IPOs this year were busts. And a recent WSJ article estimated these failed unicorn IPOs, as it were, have wiped out $100 billion from the markets. How did that backdrop inform your analysis regarding digital-first companies and advertising growth?
Yeah, well, that backdrop didn't specifically inform the analysis, but I think that something I'm certainly very conscious of as a risk is the idea that many of the companies that are driving a lot of spending may not be sustainable at their current scale. Now, that said, many of them are more than sustainable at their current scale. So the metric you really need to focus on is not what the valuation is, not what the stock price is doing, but it is really where the cash from operations, what's the cash flow, what is the company's capacity to raise more cash. I think that there are a lot of companies out there that fit the bill for these digital-first, digital-endemic companies that are relatively durable. Maybe they're not going to continue growing at double-digit rates or better, but their absolute size is reasonably solid. So I think that you can see a sort of a balanced or potential for a balanced view that yes, there's risks that some of these companies that have been driving so much growth of spending will fall away. There are others that will at least hold the line. And then, of course, you just have ongoing emergence of new brands that will make up for some of the slack.
It's really interesting. I mean, it's interesting to see, the different types of mergers that are going on and the IPOs that are going on, see what transpires in the next decade. I want to shift back to TV a little bit, though. Obviously, people are watching TV differently than ever before. You predict TV advertising to decline. How are the SVOD companies contributing to this? And is it that TV advertising is declining, or is it more so just traditional TV advertising is declining?
Yeah, I've always argued that the driver of spending in a given medium relates more to the health of the advertisers who dominate that medium. There are shifts that occur in terms of marketers responding to changes in audience levels, for example, or new opportunities such as the emergence of digital, for example. But I think that the more important point is that if the dominant advertisers on television are themselves relatively weaker in context of the overall economy, or they account for a relatively diminished share, then there's going to be reduced spending in general. Now, some of that gets made up for by the fact that you have emerging, the aforementioned digital brands rather, who are increasing their own spending in TV, SVOD services among them, of course, and that helps offset some of the decline that might otherwise occur. But I think that at the end of the day, the real issue is just that the health of the advertisers who are dominant on TV is probably the most important factor leading to our expectation.
It's interesting to see how that transpires going forward. I think we've got time for one more. Similar to the UK podcast, I want to ask you, US centric, can you give us your take on the biggest change of the past decade and a prediction of what we might see in the next one?
Boy, the biggest change in the past decade, it's probably just the dominance of digital in terms of where the growth is going. I don't think that very many people would have expected that the elevated rates of growth we saw throughout the decade, and in fact accelerated growth rates, would have held up as well as they did. In the next decade ahead, I think that maturation is what you'd have to expect, because once you become the market or get closer to becoming the market, it's hard to really change the market. You are the market. But I do think that certainly more integration with marketing technology, meaning more data, more ways to tie into customer experiences, customer service, other CRM activities, I think is one of the more important trends that will play out over the next decade.
Fantastic. And certainly, digital advertising, SVODs, they'll play obviously a big role in that, as you mentioned, in the forecast. Well, that's all the time we've got for today. You can listen to this podcast and all other episodes at our link in the posting above. Tune in next week as Brian takes us through the key takeaways and insights in the worldwide forecast. If you have any questions about our U.S. forecast, please leave it in the comments and Brian will do his best to answer you. Thanks for listening.